There you go. Okay, I almost forgot to record our lesson. That would have been bad. So today we're going to look at the beginnings of European domination throughout the globe, and for this class period, what I'm going to focus on mainly are the uh, civilizations, the cultures that were that ended up being subjugated, that ended up being on the losing end of history. So I'll be looking a lot more at those cultures because a lot of the times we look at the dominant culture and we see what comes afterwards. But I want to see where what was actually there beforehand. So we'll be looking at that more than anything, more than a lot of the European powers because we understand those more. But if you do have any more questions about that, just raise your hand or pop a question in the chat box, and I'll go ahead and answer that. So let's look at this. So the first thing, of course, we always start class with the question, and my question here for you all is, what does it mean to be civilized? What does that mean to you? What is civilized? Let's see. Let you type it out. Let's see. Or I'll just pick on someone. Let's see. Let's see. So there you go. You're starting to get it. So Brian says that to have social rules that are common to a people. So have a common set of rules that people have. Someone that is part of a civilization. Someone that is civilized to behave in the right way. How you act in society. Common rules with everyone working together. Have a place and effect. The rules have a place, the people have a place, and there are the effects of these rules. So then, if you were to tell a 15th and 16th century explorer, what would they say about the people that they are meeting? Let's say you talk to Christopher Columbus. Let's say you talk to any of the conquistadors. What do they say about the people that they are meeting? Vasco da Gama, Ferdinand Magellan. What do they say about these? What are they looking at here when they meet these people? They're barbarians. They would say that barbarians, uncivilized. And as Brian says there, it's correct. Some of the most civilized societies, the most bloodthirsty. Irfan, and Jackie both said exactly right. They would look at these people as savages, as uncivilized. Yet, the common idea of what we look at here in 2021 or 2020, I'm already skipping over to 2021. What we're looking at here in 2020 is saying that it's about having rules. Well, do these cultures not have rules? Do these cultures not have ways of behaving? They might have different rules that we might consider uncivilized. And so, barbarous, barbarians. So this term, as Liam said, is from the ancient Roman barbarian. They felt that the people of North Africa spoke bar. That's how they felt their language was. And that's where the name barbarian comes from the people that spoke barbar. So okay, let's keep this going on. How would we in 2020 look at the way that the people, the quote unquote civilized people of the 15th and 16th century? What would we look at the conquistadors? How would we see conquistadors? What would we think of them? Greedy, bloodthirsty. We would see them as uncivilized. There is this idea that that people with lesser education or lesser technological know-how are somehow less civilized than us. And that's part of what being civilized means. When I, when I think of civilized, it's part of knowing and understanding technology, being able to use technology. That's a bias that I understand about myself, that the more civilized you are, the better you are with technology. So we would definitely look at people back in the 15th and 16th centuries as being uncivilized. And part of that is, of course, that they were very greedy, they were bloodthirsty, they were out to get what they could. And so we see them as we now see them as uncivilized. So looking at these people that now seem uncivilized to us, they were at the apex of society. They saw themselves as the top of the world. And during the 15th and 16th centuries, they go ahead and try to prove it. During this time, from the 1430s all the way into the 1500s, you have this grand age of exploration. At one point, we saw this and called this the age of discovery. And we'll get more into that idea of discovery later on. But this age of exploration is also an age of conquest. It's also an age of exploitation. It is an age where humanity finally meets up, and yet it is a one-sided meeting, and we'll get into why after that. So the Portuguese, if you look here, the Portuguese were the very first European forces to begin to explore into the coast of Africa, go to India, and then later were the first to really explore South America. Anybody know why the Portuguese were the first ones to be able to explore further out? They were definitely quite wealthy at the time, as Brian says. They were, at one point, they were merged with Spain, but during this time period, they were separate. Austin and Saba pretty much hit the nail on the head there. They were right by the sea, their location. They were already great sailors and fishermen, and as the Reconquista went through, as they were able to get rid of the Moorish rulers in the Iberian Peninsula, they were one of the first ones to be freed. And so while the Spanish were still fighting, continuing to fight against the Moors, the Portuguese were able to say, that's not my fight anymore. And instead they continued and they moved down into the coast of Africa. So going down through the coast of Africa, they were able to make it around the Cape of Good Hope and eventually make it into Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is, has anybody ever vacationed down in Southeast Asia, gone that way? It's one of those places that I'd like to visit. Maybe one day after we can actually travel again, go like to Java or Indonesia, somewhere down there. It's a tropical area, tropical paradise. It is a land that's rich in agriculture, rich in sea trade. And so it was a place where a lot of exotic crops grew, and it was a place that was known to be a veritable green oasis out there. Southeast Asia was known for its spices and its goods. You know, the things that we take for granted. Ah, I would love to go to Samoa. Um, my uh, my understanding of spices is so colored. I think all of us kind of look at spices as something that we take for granted to this day. You know, being able to just go to the grocery store and for like $3 buy you know, buy spices right off the rack. You know, just go grab the McCormick's anywhere we can. But for a long time, Southeast Asia was the only place that you could get some of these spices, some of the spices that are now ubiquitous with great cuisine throughout the world. And so for things like peppers, saffron, which is still pretty expensive, and all these different spices, the people of the West would try to do anything to get it. And understand this is very important, that that Southeast Asia, it was very well known way back, even with the time of the Romans, that there was a land of great spices, and a land of exotic cuisines and things like that, because the Romans were well aware, and even sometimes traded with the East, with China, India, places like that, through the Mediterranean trade.
Hold on a second. Hold on just a second.
Yes, Joseph.
Let's turn it down a little.
Nope. So yeah, so there was there was trade already between Europeans and Southeast Asia way back in the first, even in the first centuries AD. So it was well known. Southeast Asia wasn't something that they just stumbled upon. It was something that was known back to the days of ancient Rome. So Southeast Asia is this land here, divided into two different zones. This is Indochina, or mainland, Southeast Asia, and this is the maritime, or the islands. And it is here in the Spice Islands where the Europeans really wanted to come in. Really were looking to make it and set up and control the trade. So Southeast Asian society comes up as this, you know, sort of in some ways is a throwback to the through the Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, because you did have societies that lived very simply. You did have societies that would be seen by European sailors, by European merchants and missionaries as uncivilized. You know, you had societies that lived on islands and basically made their homes in caves because, well, it was warm and it gave you everything that you needed: shelter, warmth, and it kept you safe. So that's all you needed. You really didn't need to do a lot. But outside of that, there was also some great empires that rise up out in the islands of Southeast Asia, the temple cities of Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom, and later on you're going to have great Islamic empires in Southeast Asia. So it is a place that runs the gamut between simple, what they would look at as uncivilized, and these great civilizations that built temples that were big as cities. And these temples are still around. That's one of the things that I would love to visit in Thailand is the Angkor Wat. Go and see the great temple cities there. So Southeast Asia was an area that had a lot of different forms of rule. You had areas where Buddhism had taken hold, and Buddhism was a state religion, which sort of seems kind of, to me, is very funny to see a religion like Buddhism that's all about we don't really need to be too involved with the world, don't need to be too involved with the afterlife. It's sort of a very balanced, and for that to become a state religion is sort of a kind of to be making rules is sort of an oxymoron to me, but but Buddhism really takes hold in Southeast Asia and becomes a very great religion. You also had areas where women could be rulers, where women could take control, which was, it's something that very, very rarely happened up until this point in time with European forces, even, for women to have that much power. And by the time you have the meetings of the West with Southeast Asia, you actually have Muslim leaders in Indonesia. And then in Vietnam, you have a society that basically emulates the governments of China. So it's very, very focused on Confucianism and on hierarchy and on tradition, things like that. So you have these more modern hierarchical religions such as Islam and Confucianism mixed with more esoteric Buddhism, Hinduism, and even some still pagan religions throughout. So Southeast Asian society is a diverse and varied, diverse and very wildly divergent society. So, any questions before we move on? So these societies, some of these would not be seen as uncivilized by the people, by Europeans. And this is one of the reasons why Europeans are looking to avoid, to find routes outside of the normal routes, because you have a lot of areas that are pretty much hard to get through. You have in the 13th century the rise of the Ottoman Empire. You have in the 15th century you also have the rise of the Safavids and the rise of the Mughals that we all looked at, and they are here blocking the overland routes. And with the rise of these empires, you also have Muslim merchants. You have Ottoman naval ships, and even at some point you have a resurgence in China. So you have all of these different empires sort of patrolling the ocean as well. So you could see that the European forces that wanted to make it to the Spice Islands over here needed to find ways or to get around, get away from this. And that's going to be one of the things that pushes them to abandon the Mediterranean, going through the Red Sea, trying overland routes. You can see here, if you want to make it to the Spice Islands, you have to either go all the way around Africa or make it through the Mediterranean and push through the Red Sea or through the Persian Gulf here. So Europe is trying to, is trying to get spices. Europe has the beginnings of naval power. The Renaissance has fueled innovation, and the Reformation, excuse me, and the Reformation is sorry about that. Like I said, I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. So the Europeans are trying to make it to the Spice Islands, so they need to either go all the way around Africa or find a way to defeat the forces of the Ottomans, Mughals, and Safavids. Not a, not an easy task. So they are trading spices. They are Liam asked if they're trading spices. They're trading spices, fruits, vegetables, also some exotic jewelry, exotic gems, gold pieces. So things that Europeans really want is what's being traded. So that is what Europeans really want. But mainly it is about the spice trade. So, oops. Yeah, yes, Joseph, my throat is a little off. Air quality has been terrible around Phoenix the past couple of weeks, since the entire West is on fire right now. It's just kind of a bad thing right now. So Europe comes in, and Europeans use the tools that the Renaissance affords them, things like portolani. Portolani is an Italian term for these maps that basically show the coastlines. You can't really see it very well in this one. I just like the ways that they have decorated this, but this one is a bit better. You can see the coastlines of the Iberian Peninsula, of Africa, of the Mediterranean. And really, the coastlines are what's most important to sailors. When you think about it, sailors need to know exactly where the sharp, pointy things are whenever they're sailing throughout the ocean. It is this type of map here is more important to sailors than anything else. And these maps were actually drawn and distributed through the Middle Ages and before that. So these are ancient maps. People were trading throughout North Africa from the Mediterranean, from Europe for hundreds of years. And during the Renaissance, they were able to actually, they went back and found these things. And yes, as Brian says, you really wanted to hug the coast rather than go out into the deep seas, especially if you try to go too far west here in the Atlantic, you might get caught in one of the still zones of the Atlantic where there is no current, very little wind. So you might get basically stranded at sea because you didn't have any way to propel your boat. So yeah, hugging the coast was important. And as also as important is if you are an Italian sailor and you want to sort of be able to figure out where to hide from other forces if need be. So, it's important to be able to avoid competitors just as it is to avoid the rocks. So Portolani were rediscovered and were being used again. Also being used were this new type of ship known as caravels. Basically, caravels were the next step up from the lake boats that would be used by people like the earlier Vikings and things like that were very fast, very swift, and could avoid detection, could move through currents very quickly. But they were bigger and they held a lot of goods. So if you found a lot of goods, or if you were able to buy a lot of goods, you could bring them back very easily. So they're sort of a mid-sized car, sort of a crossover SUV version of boats. You didn't always want to have a giant galleon, and sometimes you didn't want to have a very small boat because you couldn't bring as much material goods back with you. So you wanted to have a mid-size boat, and things like caravels were. Caravels used better sails as well, could quickly move from a sailing vessel to a rowing vessel if needed, and had the ability to use cannons for protection as well. So it was it was like a pickup truck version of a boat that could really be used for all sorts of excursions out west. You also had the rising use of the compass and the astrolabe, two things that had been used by Greek and Roman sailors for centuries, that during the Middle Ages sort of fell out of favor. Europeans really didn't use them very much, but coming back into favor during the Renaissance were the astrolabe, which could tell you exactly what your position was by looking at the North Star. The compass, of course, a magnetic compass always points you north, so you can kind of see exactly where you are at. And that is the most important, especially if you begin to no longer hug the coastline. Whenever you start going into deeper sea, you need things like the compass and the astrolabe. So technology, going back to our very first historical lecture, looking at technology and how the Renaissance is pushing Europe forward. Any questions about this, about the use of technology, the beginnings of the movement away? So, like we talked about, the Portuguese are the first to begin to make their way into Southeast Asia. You had the great John the Navigator and Manuel V, and his son Manuel V, and they encouraged and funded exploration. In put them out of order. Here you go. In 1487, you had Bartolomeo Diaz, who was the first to round the Cape of Good Hope, the first European, of course, to round the Cape of Good Hope, going from port to port, and setting up little forts along the way. Now, one of the things about the Portuguese is they were not really concerned with colonization of Africa at this time. They were less concerned with putting people in and more concerned with being able to reload, refuel, refill the food and water that they needed. They're more concerned with that sort of refueling than to set up any sort of colonies. Now, why would they not want to set up colonies in Africa at this time? Anybody hazard a guess as to why? Harry, I'll go ahead and pick on you this one real quick. What does it take to set up a colony?
A lot of resources.
Yep, you have to have a lot of resources. You need to have plenty of food for them, plenty of fresh water for them. You don't know exactly what type of reception they're going to get around there. If the people that live there are going to like them. So not only do you need resources, you also need people there. People are a resource also, both colonists and military that would be there to help them out. So the Portuguese, Portugal is a small country, not that many spare people laying around, and so they didn't actually set up too many colonies. Instead, they would either set up small forts or pay off the people that were already living there and basically set up docks there to use whenever they saw fit and just pay off the people that were there. But by rounding the Cape of Good Hope, they were able to set up these refueling stations so that they could make it out further and further with each voyage. After Diaz, then comes Vasco da Gama, and Vasco da Gama is going to make it to India, be the first of these Portuguese sailors that makes it all the way around Africa and makes it to India. As you can see on this map, he bypasses, he gets pretty far out away from the coast of Africa, bypasses all of these known ports, and then makes it around the Cape of Good Hope. And then after that, he begins to hug the coast a little more. He begins to use these ports that are already there, makes it to India, comes back and gets a little lost in the Arabian Sea here. I don't know exactly what happened here. Maybe he was trying to avoid someone, but there's a little bit of a zigzag there. And then he comes back and hits these same ports along the way, and then makes it back to the Canary Islands and the Azores, and makes it back to Portugal. So this trip here took him 2 years to make it around. So that's kind of a lot of resources being used and a lot of time being used just to make it to India, but they are getting further and further the wind. Yeah, Brian, I think that might be it. Trying to chase the winds around the coast, or avoid a tropical storm or something along the way. I just always find that kind of a funny way to come back. And then finally, you have, once they have set things up, you have the rule of Alfonso de Albuquerque. Alfonso de Albuquerque was a very well respected and very well loved sailor and admiral. He was a very charismatic man and very, very big man. They say he was about 6'5" at a time when most people were probably about a foot shorter at that time. So he was this big presence, this big man, and his soldiers loved him. He made his mark fighting against the Ottoman Turks, and basically throughout his whole life, his entire adult life, he fought against Muslims. Liam, let me go ahead and put that here. Alfonso. Guys, make sure that I can spell Albuquerque correctly. Yeah, there you go. Alfonso de Albuquerque. Albuquerque, being a city in Spain or Portugal that our current New Mexico City is named after. Very exotic town to be named after. So Albuquerque, he grows, he basically comes of age, and his entire career is fighting Muslims. And so he is very opposed to Muslims dominating any sort of trade. And as he becomes admiral, as he continues to sail, he's actually made governor of Portuguese India. And from here, he's going to conquer uh, areas. He's going to go back into Africa and expand his reach, and actually take over the city of Goa, which is, I believe, it's on the west coast. I think it's modern day Ivory Coast. So he makes his way into Western Africa, takes over Malacca in Indonesia, and is in charge of Portuguese India in Calicut. So he has Africa, India, and Southeast Asia under his control. And then he actually goes into the Middle East, goes in and begins to go into the Gulf of Hormuz and into the Persian Gulf, and begins to set up forts in the Persian Gulf. So not only is he in charge of India, but now he has places in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, and in this is between about 1480 and 1515. So he's really expanding his territory, and this makes the nobility back in Portugal nervous. You can imagine that some of the people in Portugal are like, okay, now this guy controls India, parts of Africa, moving into the Middle East, into Southeast Asia. It takes 2 years for you to be able to make it to India. You know, that's on a trade voyage, so it might take you months if you're going just straight to India. So if you're in Portugal and you hear word of this one man expanding territory throughout, what do you think? Let's say you're a paranoid nobleman. What do you think of this guy? Yeah, he's coming for you. You're thinking that he's a danger. You're thinking that, yeah, these are not colonies. You know, he's actually taking over cities that are already there. So he's taking up land. So yeah, he's becoming a threat to the interests in Portugal. And so the people the political enemies that he makes uh, actually convince the king. Yeah, he's creating puppet cities that he's in charge of, that they're basically paying tribute to the king, and he's in charge of all that tribute money also. Just to let you guys know, he's also in charge of some money and goods, and so yeah, he's taking over cities. So you know, his political enemies actually convinced the king to recall Albuquerque, you know, to bring him back in 1515. And so, you know, he is coming in back to Portugal, and in 1515 he dies at sea. And you can imagine what some of his men might think that he just, you know, he was, let's see, he was in his, he was about 60 years old, which is, you know, pretty advanced for the 16th century. But he was a very strong man. He was really, he was really in good health. He was very strong. He was a warrior, and then he dies. He just dies at sea, and he's buried at sea. And so after this, a lot of his allies begin to question whether or not he was murdered. He was assassinated, and that this pretty much leads to the breaking of a lot of the Portuguese naval power. You know, when you have someone that is that is that strong, one person, you know, you have one person that is able to do that. Once he dies, usually there's not anyone that can fill that that can fill that void of his. And so this really happens here in Portugal with the death of Albuquerque, and that is the beginning of the end for them. After this, Spain begins to really rise in power. He dies in 1515. The Portuguese stick to going into India in 1520, 5 years after his death. That's when the Spanish make it to Mexico and begin their takeover of the Aztec Empire. About a decade after that, they conquer the Incas, and the Portugal is sort of consumed and overtaken by Spain after that. They are never really able to remain their presence. But I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself. Yes, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. You have these new rivals to Portugal. As I was saying, Spain making it to the New World in 1492. So even a few years after Bartolomé de las Casas, you have the discoveries, the expeditions into the New World by Columbus and the beginning of the Age of Conquest. Outside of Spain, you also had the rise of two great naval powers, the English and the Dutch. 1591 sees the first English expedition that makes it to the Indian Ocean, or excuse me, through the to the Indies from the Indian Ocean. So as Albuquerque is expanding his base, the English are starting to make it to India and down into the East Indies. Then you have also the Dutch. So this is the English East India Company. You have the Dutch East India Company as well. In 1600, you have the Dutch East India Company being established. In 1591, you have the English East India Company. And we'll get more into the East India Company in a couple of weeks when we look at the changing times in Europe. But one of the things to note about these companies, these East India companies, is that they are not government owned businesses, or this isn't the government spending money sending out forces. With Portugal and with Spain, it's basically the crown, with some help from the Pope, is sending people out, is sending ships out. So they're spending their own money. With the East India companies, you have basically a board of directors that is putting up their own money. These are the beginnings of international businesses. These are private businesses that have contracts with the government, and they give parts. The government gives them a charter and gives them free rein to go out into and basically do business on behalf of the crown. And most of the profit goes to the companies. So these are private businesses. This is the beginning of private business in exploration and in Europe. And of course, people like the English and Dutch would be the first ones, because the English and the Dutch are the ones that are getting away from the Pope. You know, the English have moved away from the church, creating the Church of England, and the Dutch have also moved away from the church and have really embraced Calvinism. This really, as we talked about, Calvinism with their strong work ethic and wanting to create money, create better lives for their people, So these companies are sort of a new way of doing countries using people to make themselves even richer. So by 1641, the Portuguese are no longer really a power. The Dutch have seized Malacca from the Portuguese. And it's one of the things about the Dutch. I always joke that the Dutch are a hated peoples. But the Dutch were sort of the antagonist to a lot of these larger countries and larger empires because they had that Calvinist strong entrepreneurial spirit that they would undercut, they would get around these larger countries. They would basically be nuisances for these countries, and they would be yeah. And Calvinists really tended to believe they were better than others. One of the funny stories that I often tell about the Dutch is that the Dutch refused to dress for the weather of the East Indies. So the Netherlands, it is a pretty cold area sometimes, and the Dutch would wear heavy wool clothes, and they would make it down and trade negotiations or try to buy land from the people of the East Indies, and they would wear their heavy wool clothing in basically an 80, 85 degree climate with 99% humidity. So they would be drenched in sweat. The people of the East Indies would write about how bad the Dutch smelled because they were always sweating, but they refused to change anything about themselves. They weren't the ones, they weren't the ones that were wrong. The other people who dressed in this way, how dare they dress so provocatively? Women barely wearing any clothing, men wearing even less. How dare they do this? You're supposed to be modest and wear heavy clothing. And so it was the Dutch were basically seen as less than desirable to do business with, but they were great businessmen. And that's one of the things that really stands out, the difference between people like the English and the Dutch and the Spanish and Portuguese. Spanish were mainly, and the Portuguese were really mainly about trade, especially during the beginning. They were, they had imperial ambitions, but they didn't really want to colonize. Later on, as the Spanish begin to set up fortifications in the New World, the Portuguese are going to change their mind. But for the most part, they were mainly there to make money. They were very zealous Catholics, very anti-Muslim, and not very well liked. Portuguese, especially when they started to conquer all these lands, they were the Portuguese were very well disliked, and then you bring in missionaries and inquisitors, and you have a even worse people. The Dutch weren't really interested in religious conversion because of their Calvinist bent. Whether they're going to heaven or not is out of their hands, so why convert? They weren't interested in cultural change. They were very anti-native. They were very harsh against the heathens, and they were not well liked. And I do think that the bad smell helped the Dutch out in their negotiations. I would do anything to get someone that smelled bad away from me. Yes, you can have some of these concessions. And so the Dutch themselves were not very well liked, but the reasons that the Dutch were able to take areas away from the Portuguese is that the Dutch were more willing to ally with locals against the Portuguese. They were able to say, we'll get rid of these people and we won't even try to convert you. Of course, that changes later on as religious fervor becomes a different beast altogether. Here's a picture of the Dutch. This is the way that the Dutch would dress in basically on the beach in Southeast Asia. They at least had someone holding a parasol for them. So, you know, but yeah, they would wear their heavy black clothing throughout. So, yeah, this painting here kind of shows the sort of disdain that they had for other cultures. And it kind of shows later on, as we talk more about Calvinists and later Puritans, how their attitudes really affected the people that they meet, the natives that they meet. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah, they were the sailors were not big. Were not big. So when I was in high school, we took a trip down to Corpus Christi, Texas, and it just so happened at the time that they had the replicas of the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria docked along the shore, and we actually got to tour them. And one of the things that struck me was how tiny these ships were. And the docents that were there that were actually sailing the ship noted that most of the people that there were two things about the sailors that came with Columbus. Number one is the tallest among them were probably about 5'5", 5'6". Most people were between 5'2" and 5'4". That were sailing, because you didn't have much room on the ships, and also didn't have very good food, so you were pretty skinny, pretty small, wirely. And the second thing was that most sailors couldn't swim. They weren't taught how to swim, and this was on purpose, because you don't want someone jumping off the ship instead of trying to save it and trying to get away. Instead, you want someone that is going to die if they don't fix what's wrong with the ship. If the ship isn't operating at 100% optimization, it's going to sink and they are going to die. So those are the two things that really struck me about the way that people like Columbus, the explorers like the Portuguese and the Spanish, operated under this exploration system. You wanted someone that was unskilled in certain areas, that was superstitious. You wanted someone that was small, wiry, and ambitious. And so these are the types of people that are being sent out into the New World. These are the types of people that are being sent out to Africa, to the East Indies. These are the people that are being sent out to the Americas, are people that are that have might have a chip on their shoulder. They might have have these issues that sort of have affected them throughout their lives. Another thing that these people are is that they've been fighting their whole lives against non-Christians. So they already have this infidel or anti-heathen bend, and so they are looking and itching for a fight, and that is exactly what they find in the Americas. So once again, here I have a question for you. What is discovery? This time period was once called the age of discovery. What does that mean? What does it mean to discover something? Let's say you discover a gold coin on a hike. Stone says it's something no one has ever seen before. Something new that is foreign to you, as Harry says. So let's say you find a gold coin on a walk. So what do you think when you find this gold coin? What is your first instinct? Irfan, what is your first instinct if you're just, you know, walking along a trail and you look down and there's a shiny gold coin? What's your first instinct?
I would just walk by.
You would be like, it's more trouble than it's worth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you look for a trap. You look and see, what is this? What is going on? This is too good to be true. Jackie, what if you find a gold coin? Do you take it? Yeah. Anybody else? You can just give me a thumbs up if you find a gold coin, if it becomes yours. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Saba, you pick that up. You take it. It's there. Do you think about who it belonged to? Do you think about what it was? Depending on where you are, you know, you would think about you might think about who it was, but if there's no one around, does it matter? Finders keepers. You know, look around to see if there's anyone there. So discovery, you know, they're probably rich if they're able to just be able to drop gold coins like that. Exactly. Exactly. They have more than enough if they're just dropping gold coins anywhere, you know? Yeah. So discovery, you know, we're looking at discovery as something like it's never been seen before. But if we're able to sort of go beyond that, if it's worth it to us. Let's say, you know, this gold coin, you know, leads to another gold coin. Leads to another gold coin. You keep finding gold. You keep finding more and more. And you see, you know, someone walking in front of you and gold coins keep dropping out their pocket. Just dropping to the ground. Do you say something? Do you do something? Do you just sort of lay back? It does seem suspicious. Why are they not looking at this? Right? Most people nowadays would probably say something to this. This person, now you see this person go up to another human being and stab them, and then continue to walk. This other human being, you look around and there is a wall of skulls around. You're looking, unless they were a Dodgers fan. Well, stabbing someone probably makes them a Dodgers fan. Yeah. You didn't see anything, you don't return the coins. And this is exactly what happens with the Spanish people. They find gold, they find riches. They go in and they find that there are people that have so much. They're looking for El Dorado, the city. They're told about a city of gold. And then they make it to the heart of the Aztec capital, and they find that the Aztecs sacrificed people by the hundreds. And now things change for the conquistadors. All of a sudden, they are doing things for God. They're doing things to right what is right. They have, you know, justice on their side. And this is what we're going to be looking at here. We're going to be looking at the reasons why conquest happens. the reasons why the conquistadors are able to defeat this large force. We're going to look and see why the Americas fall so quickly to the conquistadors. And I'm going to send out a link. I'm not going to be able to put it out onto our thing, but there is a great like narrated version of the final battles against the Aztecs that kind of show that kind of narrate exactly how those things went and what the Spanish saw. But you know, looking at this age of discovery, this age of exploration, conquest, age of colonization, whatever you want to call it, this happens because of a particular sort of events, things line up exactly the right way. Remember last time we talked about how the Ottomans were looking to make peace with the English, set out into the New World, but that never happened. You know, imagine that thing, you know, a Muslim force in the Americas. That doesn't happen. The Muslim world shrinks back. The people of Europe are able to come in and take over these two great empires, these empires of millions, with just a few hundred people. And we will look at what particular sets of events led to this. So the two American empires that we're going to be looking at are the Aztec Empire and the Incan Empire. Because there's not as much written about the North American empires that came and were basically wiped out before the arrival of the English, there's really not a lot that we can say about them. But I will talk about them when I talk about colonization of North America in a few weeks. But today we're going to focus on the empires of Latin America. So, the Aztecs, the Aztec people. The origins of the Aztecs is actually been posited to be here in the Southwest United States. Aztlan, the mythical land of the Aztecs, is said to have been somewhere here in the Southwest United States. By looking at some of the oral sources from the native tribes between here and the center of Mexico, we know that there was a tribe that continually marched downward from the U.S. Down into central Mexico, working as mercenaries for generations. So they would take money and fight in wars between tribes and then continue to move forward. Now these people later created their own origin story, and what their origin story was is that their god Huitzilopochtli, the little hummingbird, commanded them to settle the land. They were supposed to find this new land, and they would be given a sign. This nomadic peoples, Liam, they weren't the Apache. These were probably around hundreds of years before the Apache, and sort of moved downwards. The Apache would have been more of northern what is now Texas and into Colorado versus the Proto-Aztecs versus the Mexica. So the people that became the Aztecs were told by their god to look for a rock And on that rock was a cactus, and on that cactus was an eagle, and in that eagle's mouth was a snake. Find this, and this is where you will set your land. And so that is why the Aztecs marched down. And so in the early 1400s, they find this land. The Mexica people, as they now call themselves, found an island where they found a cactus with an eagle with a snake in its mouth. And there they set upon creating a new city. And the second thing that their God told them was to feed. Oh, here it is. Here's the city. The city was Tenochtitlan. The city is an engineering marvel. The city was built in the late 14th century, early 15th century, so in the 1300s and early 1400s. And it is an engineering marvel because most of these islands that you see out here are actually man-made islands. They were actually built up from mud from the bottom of the lake all the way up. This central island is pretty much the only thing that exists naturally here in the lake. And so in the center of the lake, you would have these great marketplaces. You would have temples. You would have, in the outside, you would have floating islands that they use to plant crops. And actually, if you go to Mexico City to this day, you can actually take little canoes out to these floating islands. And so, which is one of the things that I actually, this October, I was supposed to go to Mexico and see my family and go to Mexico City, but I guess that can't happen now. But yeah, it's actually pretty smart. You limit wildlife, you limit any sort of pests that might be able to take these islands, and it sort of gives them much more natural protection, and it just makes sense to keep them away from any sort of invaders. So you had these natural causeway, or these man-made causeways that linked the central island to the mainland, and over all of this is present day Mexico City, over the lake. So the Aztecs' original god, their original main god, Huitzilopochtli, was their warrior god. His name is Little Hummingbird of the West, I believe. Yeah, Little Hummingbird of the West. And the reason hummingbirds are actually very important to Aztec culture, because their beaks go into flowers like they're sucking up the blood from the flowers. Blood was very important to the Aztecs. Quetzalcoatl, the serpent god, comes later. Quetzalcoatl is a god that has been in Mesoamerica for thousands of years, and the Aztecs actually adopt him as one of their main gods, and later on he sort of becomes one of their chief gods, even supplanting Huitzilopochtli. So this warrior god, Huitzilopochtli, tells him to find this island, create a civilization, and the next thing he tells them to do is feed the sun with the blood of your enemies. Because under Aztec mythology, they believe that that the only way that the sun continues is because of bloodletting. You know, they believe that the universe runs on blood, just like a human being. If he loses too much blood, dies. The earth must be fed blood. You know, animals and predators out there, they spill blood whenever they kill prey. And so they believe that sacrifice and spilling blood is important to the earth. And so the Aztecs begin to set up their civilization from Tenochtitlan, what is now Mexico City, and they begin to rule over parts of Mexico, and they leave certain areas unconquered because they want to have continual warfare, continual ritual war to gain prisoners to execute. And outside of these prisoners that they execute, they also demand tribute from their allies. So you have constant warfare and sacrifice. And the allies of the Aztecs are pretty, even the allies of the Aztecs are quickly tire of the Aztecs. Aztec society is pretty stratified. You know, warriors are elevated to the top, merchants and priests are in the middle, and then agricultural workers are down at the bottom. One thing that we found from looking at the surviving writings of the Aztecs is that women at one point were just as equal to men when everyone had to share in the work. But as Aztec society prospered, women became more important for childbearing, child raising, and became more important for artisanal labor, like making clothes and making and growing crops and basically anything that was that is traditional women's work. So it becomes less of a equal society and more of a stratified society. You know, polygamy becomes much more important, and the male bloodline becomes more important to the Aztecs. The Aztecs also played the ball game, which is the traditional South Latin American game where you would have basically a medicine ball, and you would try to get it to the hoops without using your hands or feet, using your hips. And there are stories that there were some games that were played, loser gets sacrificed at the end. So these were high-stake games. So by the time the Spanish make it, you know, you would have sacrificial, you would have sacrifices that numbered in the hundreds. The Spanish wrote that at one point they saw 20,000 people sacrificed. That's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but there were definitely times when hundreds of people were sacrificed at one time. And yes, the Aztecs did have these walls of skulls that would be around. So once seeing this, you have the Spanish pretty much turning and deciding that they are going to defeat these demonic people, and the allies of the Aztecs quickly come to their aid. So do this first slide of the Inca, and then we'll probably take a break. So that is the Aztecs. Any questions about the Aztecs before we move on to South America? So by this point, the Aztecs are not very well liked at all by not even their allies, and so they are really primed to be defeated. The Inca, however, are a different subject, because the Inca actually begin their lands as just a small group among a small group of a small tribe in the coast of South America, pretty much hugging the coast, because does anybody know what is between Chile and Argentina, or Peru and Brazil? Anybody know what would make it very difficult to cross this land? That's right, there's some big mountains there. The Andes Mountains are actually there. So all of these tribes had to hug the coast for hundreds, if not thousands of years. You just had small societies. You didn't have large empires until the 1400s, when Pachacuti, the first Incan Sapa, takes over and begins to expand his territory. So by the time 1532, by the time that the Spanish make it, you have this gigantic empire that is ruled by a Sapa Inca, a leader, and it is basically built on the back of llamas. Neither the people of South America do not have any pack horses or anything, but they do have llamas and alpacas. And llamas and alpacas are basically camels with even worse attitudes. So it is very difficult to get things going. But the Incas are able to create this empire through technological and engineering marvels such as the Incan roads. And these are roads that you can still take to this day. Rope bridges that have been around for hundreds of years, steps carved into the rocks, basically areas where you have to basically shimmy along the sides to make it through to this day. But the Incan roads are the technological marvel of the Inca. Incan society itself was based on maize, the llama, and a structure of agriculture known as the mita, which basically said that 1 year out of every 7 years, if you were an able-bodied man, you went and worked in state-run farms run by the empire. So for an entire year, you would work for the empire, and then you would go back home. And then somebody else would, from your other, so it was a staggered work. It was conscripted work, but it was staggered through so that no village ever suffered having all of their men taken away. So this mita system enabled the people to move throughout the empire and actually contribute to the empire, and make them feel like they were more a part of the empire. And we'll go ahead and pause right here and take a break. Let's come back at around 8 o'clock, 8:01 to continue on our journey in South America. Okay. Let's see. Volume back up. Okay. So this mita system, this conscription system of working, really helps the Incan empire move throughout, because it does give you a lot more people to work. It allows you to move your military without them having to set up any sort of colonies along the way. As we'll look at this more, especially in European history. But the important thing about moving an army is that you have to feed the army. And if you have a bunch of soldiers that are marching through without creating anything behind them, or any sort of food system behind them, you're constantly having to move food sources throughout. But the mita system allows the Incan empire to capture new people, capture new land, and make them a part of the empire and make them working. So the Incan government, the Incan kings, are a lot better liked than the Aztec kings ever were, because the Incan kings brought prosperity, and they actually made people a part of the empire, as opposed to the Aztecs that created this. Even though the Incan society was very stratified, it was a lot more egalitarian than the Aztecs ever were. So these are the two empires that we do find in the in the Americas, and these are the empires that are found by the Spanish when the Spanish make it to the New World. So as I said, there are these specific events that have to happen for the Spanish, for the Europeans to really make it into the New World. And part of those things is that Columbus has to be just that convincing and just that bad at math. One of the misconceptions about the age of exploration is that people felt that the world was flat, and that's why they didn't go west. People knew that the world was round, and actually back in even in Egypt there was a scientist that actually calculated the size of the Earth down to, and he missed it by a couple hundred miles, but still for that by using the sky charts, he was able to get it within that close of a range. So people knew that the Earth was round, but Columbus felt that everyone was wrong and it wasn't as big as everyone thought it was. And so he went first to Portugal, then to Genoa and Venice, and finally he goes to Spain, and Spain actually says, well, we'll give you 3 ships and some money. You know, we're not going to give you a lot. We're just going to give you 3 ships. And he makes it. And in 1492, Columbus makes it across the Atlantic, hits that still zone in the Atlantic, slows to a crawl, and his men are about to mutiny. He gives them, they give him one more day before they're going to turn around, and it is on that day that the ships see land. It is on that day that the ships are going to make it to San Salvador, one of the islands off the coast of Hispaniola, which is Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And the exact location of San Salvador is not known, but it is here that that Columbus makes landfall. Columbus begins to sail throughout the Caribbean and begins to leave his men there. And everywhere that the men are left behind, he tells them, just don't mess things up. And they go and they completely mess things up. Death and violence follows the Spanish conquistadors on Columbus's first voyage. And in later voyages, you see Columbus being much stricter with his men and having to be a lot more of a dictator, because the men just run loose. The people of the Caribbean islands at that time don't really have any need for warfare, so they're not a warlike peoples, and these men that come in are completely foreign to them. Imagine, in today's day and time, aliens just come down and and set up shop in the middle of Tempe. Everyone just could be like, oh, what is going on? What is this? And it's just that same sort of awe and confusion by the people that are there, and that confusion quickly turns to dread as the beginning of conquest happens, as much more fervent religious figures come in, as much more greedy conquistadors come in. You have them going in and beginning to find these empires. Hernan Cortez and Francisco Pizarro being the biggest examples. Hernan Cortez making it to Mexico and conquering the Aztecs, and Pizarro conquering the Inca. The main reasons that we have for conquest are the three big ones are the guns, germs, and steel hypothesis given by Jared Diamond, an anthropologist, in his work Guns, Germs, and Steel. Has anybody read that book or seen the documentary of that? It's a very fascinating. I've actually Jared Diamond actually came to ASU and I heard him talk, and it's a very good argument. It is very sound argument, but it is a bit simplified. That is what people sort of hit him. The criticism that he's hit with is that it oversimplifies things. The people of the Americas did not have guns, did not understand guns. They had no protection from disease, and they had no way to create steel. They didn't have the ore available to create steel. So these three advantages were quickly taken by the Spanish, but it's not the only reason why we have conquest. You also have, the Aztecs making great enemies all over the place. You have the Incas, and I didn't mention this, but I'll go ahead and mention this, that whenever the Sapa Inca dies, it is his son's duty to raise an army and fight against one another. That is what they're supposed. How the new Inca, the Sapa Inca is chosen is basically the sons fight against each other and kill their brothers off. And Pizarro lands a couple of years after the Sapa Inca has died, and so the Sapa Inca's Hualtepec. I think that's who it is. His children are fighting against one another, and Pizarro allies himself with the strongest and uses him to gain power. So Guns, Germs, and Steel is a start, but there are other reasons why the Aztecs, the Incas, and other empires fall. And the most important of these, which I will stop sharing and I'm going to pause record, is with the horse. This is, like I said, horses weren't known in the Americas, and so having that advantage of cavalry versus pure infantry of the Aztec and Incan peoples meant that the Spanish were able to really basically use psychological warfare, and it even increased the usefulness of the guns and of their steel. So to me, this is a much more important element of it than just the guns, germs, steel. Is also the horses, and then the allies, and then. So there's other things outside of guns, germs, and steel, but it is a good start. So after the conquest of the Americas, you have the beginning of what's known as the Columbian Exchange, named after Christopher Columbus. And this Columbian Exchange basically is the movement of goods that had not been seen in Europe or in Africa or Asia from North America, and the opposite going from the Europe, Asia, and Africa to the Americas, so old world to new. And some of the things that are important and very odd to us today is things like tomatoes not being in Europe. So Italian cuisine did not have tomatoes before 1500. Potatoes not being in Europe. So the Russians did not have potatoes for their vodka before 1500. The diseases that came over from Europe into the Americas are smallpox, influenza, typhus, measles. So all of these very deadly diseases came from Europe to the Americas, but then also did cattle, sheep, pigs. You had sugar cane and bananas. citrus fruits coming to the Americas for the first time. So you had all of these different exchanges, and this is in the 1500s. Yeah, you had honeybees come over. Later, Africanized bees are going to come over, but you had this is the beginning of world trade. You know, you now have a global trade. Beforehand, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and even Australia traded with one another, and the two Americas were trading with one another, but there was no world trade, and there really was no world history. Now there is world history. This is the beginning of world history. This is where the Americas and Europe, Africa, and Asia begin to play off each other, begin to interact with one another. And the only disease that really makes it from North America to the old world is syphilis. Syphilis being picked up very quickly by sailors, by Spanish sailors and later Portuguese sailors, goes back to Europe and actually does a lot of damage in the ports of Europe and Asia and Africa. And it is some measure of revenge from North America to the Europeans. But these diseases, smallpox, malaria, diphtheria, all of these have up to a 98% casualty rate among the people. The native peoples that Columbus first met, the Arawak peoples, they actually completely die out by the middle of the 16th century. They are actually an extinct peoples because of the ravages of disease. And so, as I said in the lecture, the Europeans that came over found that there was all these goods that were going to make big money in Europe, but they weren't going to do the work. And the natives that they had put into place to work were dying off by the hundreds of thousands. And so instead, the Americas need workers because of the mass death of natives. And the Americas needed the workers, and the Americas are going to find these workers in Africa. And so now we're going to look at the exploitation of Africa, the beginnings of the slave trade. We'll come back more when we look at the colonial North and South America, and really go into much more of the racial and humanistic ideals behind racism. So this is a question that I am going to, we're not going to get into this just today. I'll leave this to our next one, but and the next time we look at colonization, but the idea of what a person is, have that in your mind. We've already talked about what civilization is, or what we feel is civilized, but start thinking about, as you are reading it, as you are going through and looking at the world that is being built after the Columbian Exchange, start thinking about who is a person, what is a person, what does it mean to be a human being. Start having that in your head, especially as our exam is coming up. So just sort of a hint there for you guys. Have this idea of what it means to be a person in your head, because that is going to be one of the biggest issues going forward with colonization and the split from Europe, is this idea of personhood. So keep that in your head. What we will look at is Europeans as they make it into Africa, how that affects Africa. You had in Africa these empires beforehand. Even though most African, the stereotype of African cultures is that they are small, is that they are villages and not very well developed. You did have large empires, especially in Western Europe or Western Africa, where you had large deposits of gold, where you had a lot of riches. So you were able to build empires there. But as the climate around the Sahara changed, as the Sahara spread, a lot of these empires ended up being lost to time. But what we do know about these empires is brought to us by Muslim traders that would actually Muslim merchants that would actually trade with these empires, and is from this that we learn a lot about Africa, that we know a lot about the cultures of Africa. But there were civilizations there that were great. There were civilizations there that had begun to make waves in the world before they ultimately were subsumed by the natural decline of empires. You also have the beginnings of European colonization in South Africa. South Africa is where you have the first of these permanent settlements by Europeans. The Portuguese are driven out of South Africa by the Dutch, and the Dutch set up the first permanent colonies in South Africa. These people known as Boers or Afrikaners are put into setting up shop, and they begin to push into African tribal land, and that's when you start beginning to see the beginnings of warfare between Europeans and Africans themselves. But like I said, you have this need for workers in the Americas, because the Europeans that are conquering, the conquistadors, the nobility that is moving over to the Americas, they're not going to be doing the work. No one wants to do the work, and slaves are seen as better for the work that is needed to be done, for the heavy agricultural work that needs to be done. Excuse me real quick. Sorry about that. Had another sneezing fit. So slaves are sent to the Americas, and it is there that they do the backbreaking work. And from there, sugar, tobacco, and cotton are sent to Europe. And from there, Europeans use cotton especially to create clothing. They use the sugar to create rum, and they also send guns to Africa to create what is known as the triangle trade of slaves to the Americas, raw materials to Europe, and manufactured goods to Africa. The Zulus, sorry, I missed this question. Yes, the Zulus are an empire in the 1500s, and whenever we look at Africa more in depth, we'll talk about the Zulu Dutch wars. So you have this triangle trade rise in pretty quickly after the beginnings of the conquest of the Americas. So all of this goes hand in hand. All of this is interlinked. The rise of Europe with the conquest of the Americas and the beginning of slavery. And this slave trade is something that is very new to the world. As I said in our recorded lecture, that this slave trade was something that is different from slavery that had come before. This was a slave trade that was much more on a much more massive scale. It was something that is almost industrialized, whereas slavery before was based on warfare, was based on conquest of ritual sacrifice, what have you. You know, it becomes something different in the age of exploration, the age of conquest, because slavery takes on a role outside of what it normally had before. When you have slave ships that are filled to the brim, when you have slavers that are willing to throw their entire cargo over rather than lose their ship, you see that that people become disposable, people become reusable, and people's lives are cheap. And that is one of those things about that we're going to be talking about later, is how can you do this to people? You have to kind of begin to say, well, they're not really people. You have to sort of dehumanize people that you are enslaving. You have to make some sort of excuses, because this is true that slavery is something that is baked into civilizations from the very beginning. One of the first written codes, the Code of Hammurabi, actually talks about what you're supposed to do with your slaves, how you're supposed to treat them. And the slavery that has gone through the world for thousands of years is a slavery that is personal, that is almost always due to military actions, and it is a slavery that is very well within the confines of a society. So slaves have a role in society, and you have to treat them with a certain amount of respect. Whereas what happens in this new chattel slavery, this new European slavery, is that it is all about dollars and cents. It is all about money. It is all about dehumanizing. And if you look at it, there are ways to read into this period in history. If you're looking at it from if you're looking at it from a racial component, racial reading of history, then it becomes about white Europeans not seeing Africans as true humans. If you look at it from a Marxist or leftist view of history, then it is a view of capitalism running wild and money being more important. Because, as I said, the slave trade becomes much more. It sort of snowballs and just becomes a much bigger system. The Africans and Muslim traders that had been in charge are soon overtaken by the Dutch and Portuguese slave traders. They decide to get rid of the middleman. So if you're looking at it from that end of history, from that reading of history, from that Marxist view of history, then it's just capitalism run amok. If you're looking at it from a conservative view of history, then it is this ideal of progressivism run amok. That it is this ideal where the idea of pushing forward, of societies moving forward without any reverence to the past, means that pseudoscience and basically categorizing people in ways that they shouldn't be categorized becomes the most important part of slavery. So you're looking at people that are being put into these roles that they are not really supposed to be in. So there are so many ways to look at slavery, no matter your historical bent, no matter your historical bias, that there is, here in 2020, that I don't think it is that I don't think it is a controversial thing to say that slavery was bad, that slavery was one of these evils. Now, the things that people say, was it a necessary evil? Was it an evil that we've actually moved on from? And those are questions that have to be dealt with. The ideas of slavery and the roles that good civilized society play into a barbarous act is something that we are still grappling with today. And that is why your discussion question this week is actually going to be talking about that. Is about grappling with the legacies of slavery, because as Brian said, in that North Americans took slavery to new lows, and these were supposed to be the enlightened people. These were supposed to be these great liberated thinkers. And yet we still have this new trade, this trade that actually begins and is approved of by religious leaders, by the church, by the English church, by Calvinists, by any religious denomination, really begins and really gives their blessing to it, because you are at least building them up from being uncivilized. It is that the quote that came to prominence during the debates about Confederate monuments, of the quote from Robert E. Lee, that said that it is better for a black man to die in slavery than to live in barbarism, basically. So this is an evil that permeates throughout, and no matter, like I said, no matter what sort of history that you no matter what your views on history, what your views on the way that history has moved through the ages, this is a time period that is hard to wrap your head around. It's hard to understand how people could do this cruel thing to others. And so I wanted here to sort of, in this class lecture and in the lecture online, sort of give you the backgrounds of African slavery, how it comes to be, and how it transforms Africa for the worse, and how it greatly benefits Europe, so that whenever you have your discussion after this, you can sort of you can have this idea of how it affects even our societies here. What are we 400 years later? We're looking at slavery still impacting the world today, because ultimately Africa loses out a lot. They are sending people, they're sending gold, ivory, spices, all of these things to Europe. Europe is sending basically alcohol and firearms to Africa. So Africa suffers from a loss of hundreds of years of able-bodied men, hundreds of years of sending gold, of sending riches to Europe. And Europe gets all of these all of this benefit, and Africa ends up losing out. Whereas to this day, Africa is a continent that has been left behind. And this is not even talking about direct colonization, direct imperialism. This is just indirect imperialism. Africa is going to suffer even more throughout the coming hundreds of years of human history. So Europe ultimately benefits greatly from this. North America begins to benefit later, as you see the breaking away of Europe. So does anybody have any questions about the slave trade, or about the causes, the justifications of slavery at the time, or the ways that slavery develops from more personal slavery to this mass slavery. Nope. Well, then I am going to leave that to you then in the discussion question this week to sort of try to tackle these ideas of the legacies of slavery, of the ideas of, what is a person, Brian mentions that compromise, that great compromise by the founding fathers, that African slaves are 3/5 of a person, and that is because the South didn't want them to count as people, and so the compromise is that they are 3/5 of a person. They are less than, and that's something that plays to this day. So yeah, so I'm going to leave all that I'm going to give you a chance to do some heavy lifting. Put your ideas out there. I'm sure all of you will be respectful, but understand that your opinions are your own, and that you can that you should feel safe in talking about things like this. Yes, sorry about sorry about that. That's what it was. The North didn't want them to count as a full person because it gave the South too much of a electoral edge, voter edge, because they would be able to count slaves as people, yet slaves couldn't vote, had no real rights, and the North felt that was unfair politically for the South to do that in the census. And so the South wanted them to be counted, and I had it backwards there. The South wanted it to be counted, and then them not have any of the rights or any sort of protections. So thanks for catching that, Liam. So, like I said, I'm going to let you guys do some of the heavy lifting of history here. Talk about that, and if let's put your ideas out there. Don't be afraid to talk about how it's still affecting us to this day. Because right now, the slave trade, slavery, Jim Crow laws, all this stuff is still important, and it's still something that is being talked about here in 2020. So let's continue that discussion. So next week we will move and start to talk about the Far East. We're going to be looking at China and Japan. We're going to be sort of seeing how they close themselves off and how that helps Europe even more. And then after next week, we'll at the end of next week's class, we'll go over the first exam, which will be coming up after next week's class. So if you guys have any other questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and end the class early this week. I'll go ahead and